The Stolen Lake by Joan Aiken. 5. The rack railway train that was to carry the party from Bewdley up to a height of 12,000 feet above sea level was such a strange-looking little conveyance that when they first set eyes on it, Dido exclaimed, "Love a Jack, that thing couldn't pull pussy across the parlour!" Captain Hughes, equally glum and dubious, observed that it resembled a row of dominoes in process of falling down. The rolling stock of the little train did indeed have a curiously tilted appearance, since most of its journey would be spent going up the side of a slope like a church steeple. Consequently, while on flat ground, the whole thing leaned forward as if engaged in studying its own toenails. The tiny wood-burning engine carried a top-heavy smokestack with a fuel box and water tank behind. There were 3 wagons, a baggage and mail car loaded with straw bales, goats, poultry, salt, and dried fish, a box car crammed to its thatch-load roof, with standing passengers all wrapped snugly in the local garb of ponchos and long cloaks, which they called ruanas, and a first-class car, which, for the benefit of the foreigners, was supplied with a few narrow wooden benches. The train ran on 3 rails, the center one having large cog teeth, which engaged with similar teeth on a set of wheels under the cars, so that however steep the slope, the train could never slip backward. Gay red roses and green leaves had been painted along the sides of the wagons a long time ago. The paint, like everything else about the train, was old, dirty, and worn. After considerable delay, the engine started with a great snorting and straining and blowing of steam, and a shriek so prolonged that it seemed to be protesting against its task. Almost as soon as it had clanked away from Bewdley, the track stopped being level and began to climb. They rounded a corner of the Severn Gorge, crept up a steep hillside, and were immediately presented with a view so magnificent that it made Dido gasp. A mile west of Bewdley, the valley of the Severn was barred by a great semicircle of cliffs over which the river came racing in a huge horseshoe of boiling white water. Full 3/4 of a mile from side to side, white vapor rose from it like smoke, and the roar was loud enough to drown even the screeching and chugging of their engine. "That's what I kept hearing last night. I thought it was lions roaring and tigers caterwauling," Dido said to Mr. Holystone, who whispered that the cascade was known as the Falls of Haifa, and formed the lowest in a series of 7, all equally majestic. "The others are Stefano, Eurite, Medusa, Minerva, Nemetone, and Rhiannon, the 7 witches who guard the secret land of Upper Cumbria." "Ain't there no way to Upper Cumbria but by this railway?" "Not from the sea. Before the rail track was cut, men thought the precipices too high to scale." "Then," said Dido skeptically, "how did the first lot ever get there? The ones who came over after the Battle of Diaham?" "They had landed farther down the coast and traveled north through the mountains and the valley of Lake Arianrod. Come by the back way, I see. That way, too, leads in through a very narrow pass. It wants but one great rock to fall, which hangs poised on the lip of Mount Catalonde, and the way would be blocked, and Upper Cumbria would be sealed off." "Only if the railway stopped running," Dido pointed out. "What a lot you know about it all, Mr. Hawley." "I have always been interested in ancient history." His weak voice died away in a great yawn, and his head nodded forward. He roused up again, however, to say to Captain Hughes, "Sir, do not forget that when we reach Bath Regis, which is 13,000 feet above sea level, all the party must be careful to avoid undue exertion at first. The air is so thin that the least effort causes palpitations of the heart. You will ache all over. Headaches and nosebleeds are not uncommon." He toppled over on his side. He had been sitting on the wagon floor, propped against the wall. Dido, kneeling by him, worriedly saw that he was in a kind of half-sleep, half-swoon. His fainting fit last night had occasioned a great deal of concern. He had recovered only after a great many restoratives had been administered, and Captain Hughes had said firmly there could be no question of his returning to the coast by himself. or of his remaining in the small and primitive inn at Bewdley, he must accompany the party to Bath, where there were sure to be doctors and he could be properly cared for. Poor Mr. Holystone had been too weak to protest, although he seemed wretched in spirits, as if the whole atmosphere of Cumbria oppressed him and made him ill. In the morning he had to be carried on board the train. "Best leave him to sleep," said Captain Hughes. "Poor devil, maybe it is merely the altitude that is affecting him, and he will recover in due course." Dido felt sure that it was more than that. She had not informed Captain Hughes about the messages in the cat's collars. She could just imagine the scorn with which he would dismiss such idle nonsense, but she herself felt certain that they had something to do with Mr. Holystone's infirmity. As the train zigzagged its way upward, she occupied herself by looking out of the dirty window at the scenery, which was certainly very astonishing. Day wore slowly on as they climbed higher and higher, curving over mountain sides and through narrow passes, creeping along narrow rocky valleys, and yet again up and up, following the course of the river Severn, now transformed to a boulder-strewn torrent. They passed many more waterfalls, some plunging from 1,000-foot crags into vapor-filled gorges, others pouncing down hillsides step by step. At last Dido became bored with her own company, for Noah Gusset was curled up asleep, Mr. Multiple and the lieutenant were playing chess, and Plum, a silent man at all times, was knitting himself a sock, while Captain Hughes, having written up his log, was deep as usual in aeronautics. Seizing the chance when the train stopped at a wayside halt to take on more wood and water and allow a customs official to inspect the foreigner's credentials, Dido slipped out of the first-class car onto the rock platform beside the track. "Hey, young'un, where are you off to?" demanded Lieutenant Windward, sticking his fair head out. "I'm a-going in the box-car for a bit," said Dido. "I'll be all rug. Don't you fret your fur." She was startled at the bitter cold of the mountain air, high up here between Ambridge and Arike. She made haste to scramble into the second-class car, where the atmosphere was as warm as a nesting box. There were no seats at all in here, and the passengers, who were mostly sunburned peasants bringing their goods to the city, all squatted on the floor. They wore sandals, ponchos, goatskin trousers, and a dozen hats apiece, and the floor was littered with melon seeds, pineapple tassels, and plantain rinds. However, the human climate was a great deal more cordial than in the first-class accommodation. Dido was greeted cheerfully enough and offered cherries from a basket, a bite of delicious fruit called chirimoya, and a mugful of chicha, a drink not unlike cider. Chicha, a drink not unlike cider. She learned, partly by sign language, since the peasants spoke mostly Latin, that they came not from Tenby, but from small clearings in the forest, and that they were coming to sell their hats in Bath. She herself was bombarded with questions. "Why is the gringo captain coming to Bath? Why is he permitted to do so? Why does he leave his ship?" "He is coming to visit your queen," Dido said. "Wants to see her mercy, do he? Why, in the name of Grandmother Sewell?" "No," said Dido. "She wants to see him. She wants him to do something for her." This was received with puzzlement and wonder. What could the gringo captain do for her mercy that her couldn't do for herself? A powerful, wise woman she be. "Pick up the cheese ring with her bare hands and sling it into the middle of Dewsbury Pool, her could," Dido gathered. "Pick up the cheese ring with her bare hands and sling it into the middle of Dewsbury Pool, her could." Dido gathered that these were the local names for Mount Catalonde and Lake Arianrod. "Make old Damier kill blow sparks into King Mabon's beard. She's a powerful one, she be. Could turn Severn water backwards through Pulteney Bridge, aye. She a rare an old Queen Guinevere." "Why doesn't she have a king?" Dido asked. "In England we have both." They were all amazed at her ignorance. "Of course there be a king. Didn't you know that? Lives in his own place, top of Beechin Hill, in the Wen Pendragon. But he don't come out. Wounded he were in the wars." "What wars?" "Long ago wars. Old wars. He won't get no better till the red rain do fall. Then the great gates will open and he'll go home again. What red rain? Nobody was certain about that. He'll get better in his own time, maybe. Seemingly. Maybe that's what the Queen wants, said Dido. Maybe she wants Captain Hughes to recommend a doctor from England. This precipitated a great discussion among the peasants, some saying that the Queen could do anything, and consequently needed no help from outsiders, others pointing out that she must have some reason for summoning the gringo captain. In the middle of this, Dido was greatly startled to see the tall, thin, black-clad figure of Bran, the storyteller, unfold himself from a corner where he had been dozing unnoticed, and move into the middle of the car. He and his white bird on his shoulder. He had his white bird on his shoulder and greeted Dido with a friendly nod. "Oh!" cried Dido, delighted. "Now you can finish the story about the man and the stick." But the word story instantly aroused a commotion among the other passengers. A story, your excellency, your venerable, your squireship, your knowledge, your knowingness. Do ye now kindly tell us a story? Very well, said the man called Bran. If you will all be so good as to keep quiet so that I can make myself heard. Instantly a dead silence prevailed apart from the spitting of melon seeds. Bran thought for a moment, cleared his throat, and began. Once a man called Juan applied for a post as a night watchman at a warehouse. He had been promised the job, but when he got there, the overseer said to him, "That job has been given to someone else." "To whom?" furiously demanded Juan. "To the man who just left." Looking out the door, Juan was amazed to see that the other man exactly resembled himself. "Stop, you impostor!" shouted Juan, chasing him across the street. "You have stolen my job." But the other man turned a corner, and Juan could not find him. Then Juan fell in love with a beautiful girl. But when he asked her to marry him, she said, "I am already promised to that man on the other side of the marketplace." And he looked across, and there was his double again. "Now I shall catch you, you wretch," he bawled, and he rushed across the square. But when he reached the other side, his rival had gone. And many times this happened. If it was the last loaf of the baker's counter, or the last place on the ferry, it was always the double who got there first. Then one day, as Juan was going downhill toward the river, he saw his double not far ahead. "Now I shall catch him," thought Juan, and he began to run. But as the other man walked out on the bridge, a great flood came, roaring down the riverbed, and washed the bridge away. And Juan wept and raged, and would not be comforted. "For," he said, "now I have lost my enemy forever." "Is that the end?" asked Dido. "That you must decide for yourself," said Bran. Dido reflected. "Well, I think he was a looby to carry on so," she said. "If I'd been him, I'd never—" But Bran was briskly going round among the peasants, collecting small copper coins in a wooden cup. Then he sang a song, accompanying himself on his harp. "I can hardly bear it, waiting for tomorrow to come. Joy, I want to share it, waiting for tomorrow to come. Love, I must declare it, waiting for tomorrow to come. For that's the day when she will come my way. See, time seems to creep, waiting for tomorrow to come. Clock is gone to sleep, waiting for tomorrow to come. Patiently I keep." His voice was drowned by a tremendous shuddering, creaking, and clanking as the train drew to a standstill. "Are we taking on more wood and water?" asked Dido, as Bran stopped singing. "No," he said, "we have reached our destination. We are in Bath." The peasants began leaping out of the boxcar. In 2 minutes they were all gone. Dido skipped out after them and found herself on an icy, windswept stone pavement, inadequately sheltered by a thatched canopy. The air was bitter. "Make haste, if you please, Miss Twite," came the captain's voice. "No time to loiter about, and much too cold. We must get poor Holystone into shelter. Come along." "But Bran," said Dido, looking round, "won't you please tell me—" Bran's tall figure, however, had vanished among the peasants in their flowing ruanas and high-piled stacks of Panama hats. Reluctantly, Dido followed the captain's impatient beckoning arm and walked, shivering, through a kind of open-fronted station hall to a paved courtyard beyond. Here there were hackney carriages waiting, and a number of sedan chairs with their poles resting on the ground. and the blue-coated chairman standing by them. "Sydney Hotel," Captain Hughes ordered one of the hackney drivers in a loud, authoritative voice. "Gossett, Multiple, take Mr. Holystone up carefully and lay him in the carriage seat." Mr. Holystone was still asleep, it seemed. "Sydney Hotel," one of the chairmen said to Dido. "Hop in, missy, and we'll have you there in a flick of a pig's tail." Dido would have liked to ride in a chair. They had gone out of fashion in London, and she had never seen one. But Captain Hughes called irritably, "Into the carriage, Miss Twite! Look sharp now. We don't want to keep poor Holystone hanging about in this bitter cold." "Sorry, mister," Dido apologized to the hopeful chairman, and she clambered into the carriage. Glancing through the window next moment, she nearly dropped her cloak bag. For an instant she could have sworn that the rear chairman was Silver Taffy, but then he moved into the shadows and disappeared. It can't have been him anyway, Dido thought. What would he be doing here? We left him behind at Bewdley. Dusk was falling as they clattered out of the station yard over bumpy cobbles. Dido looked down to see if they were silver, but the light was too poor to be sure. It was freezing cold outside the carriage, and the steam from the horse's nostrils looked like dragon's breath. Dido shivered on the slippery leather seat and huddled against the comfortable warmth of Mr. Midshipman Multiple. He, Noah, Dido, and Plum rode in this carriage. Captain Hughes, Mr. Holystone, and Lieutenant Windward were in the other, which had already started. Despite the cold, Dido would not have minded a long drive if it had been possible to see anything of the town. But there were hardly any street lights. The only illumination came from dim gleams here and there behind lace-curtained windows. Bath Regis, for a capital city, seemed very quiet and glum. Luckily, it proved no more than a 10-minute trot from the station to the Sydney Hotel, over a covered bridge with closed market stalls on either side, and along an extremely wide street. Then the travelers had reached their destination and were being solicitously helped to alight by half a dozen porters and footmen. By the time Dido entered the vestibule, she heard Captain Hughes giving orders that a dressmaker be fetched immediately to fit his young companion with a court dress. Oh no, thought Dido in despair, not again. Madame Etarde is Her Majesty's court dressmaker and mantua maker, sir, the landlord was respectfully informing the captain. Her establishment is in Orange Grove, no more than a step from here, but it will all be shut up at this time of night. My counsel to you, sir, if the matter is urgent, would be for the young lady to call round there first thing in the morning with her Abigail and see what madam has on the premises. That way no time will be wasted. Captain Hughes thought well of this advice. If Holystone is feeling more the thing, he can take you there tomorrow as soon as his Atade female opens shop, he told Dido briskly. I wish to spend no more time than need be in Bath, which seems a devilish dismal place and as cold as a coffin. If madam can ring you out in time, perhaps we can go see Her Majesty tomorrow afternoon. Atade, thought Dido. Where have I heard that name before? She packed the name away in the corner of her mind, which held unanswered questions, such as the name Ellen. Where had that been mentioned, apart from on the cat's collars? And who had worn a gold ring? And what did Brand's stories mean? Meanwhile, went on the captain, we had best dine, and then you, child, may retire to your chamber. I have instructed Mr. Multiple to keep watch outside your door. As Holystone is ailing, we want no repetition of what occurred in Tenby. Dinner in the large, bare, and ice-cold dining room was a horrible meal of hot water with bits of egg and potato floating about in it, succeeded by what Lieutenant Windward unhesitatingly identified as boiled llama and beans, followed by hard green bananas. Dido, who like the rest found herself breathless, aching and limp, affected as Mr. Holystone had prophesied by height sickness, was glad to go off to bed, exchanging a rueful grin with Midshipman Multiple, who took up his station outside her door on a cane cot. A doctor had been summoned for Mr. Holystone, who had been carried to his chamber long before, but no doctor would come at night in Bath, it seemed. Dido tumbled into her damp and freezing bed, which consisted of a heap of quilts on a wooden frame, and was soon asleep. She woke before dawn, hearing the cry of the watch, 6 o'clock and a fine frosty morning, and was thereafter kept awake by other street criers, milk girls, porter boys, straw hat vendors, needle and powder sellers, and by the morning of cats and the clatter of iron-bound wheels over cobbles. Recalled to wide wakefulness and curiosity, Dido scrambled out of bed. She observed now that the bedclothes were simply a pile of hides with the shaggy wool attached, pulled on such clothes as she had taken off the night before, and went to the window, drawing back lace curtains adorned with blobs of red and blue wool. She discovered a stone balcony outside, so she opened the window and stepped out into the blistering cold. Sucking in her breath with shock, she retreated, wrapped herself in one of the shaggy hides, and returned to study the scene before her. The city of Bath Regis lay in a kind of narrow hollow. The biggest and most impressive buildings were grouped at the bottom, and streets of smaller dwelling houses, elegantly laid out in circles, squares, and crescents, rose in tiers up the sides of the hilly basin. Cactuses among the buildings, and spiky trees, which Dido later learned were called Sigsy, thorn, and capuli cherry, here and there indicated the location of a park or a public garden. The houses were square, handsome, and clean, built of cream-colored stone. They looked brand new, though most of them were many hundreds of years old, being preserved in excellent condition by the dry mountain air. The Sydney Hotel stood at the end of a large oval circus, and faced down a wide street. At the far end of this street was the covered bridge, which the travelers had crossed last night. Already morning traffic was plying busily up and down, carriages, carts, and a kind of streetcar, which consisted simply of a roofed platform on wheels, drawn by mules. Burros were plentiful. Also to be seen were numbers of large fawn-colored llamas, ambling along at their leisurely gait, and gazing about them with absent-minded expressions. These did not pull carts, but carried bundles on their backs and were led by drovers, sometimes in processions of 20 or more. Leaning farther over her stone parapet, Dido discovered with amazement that the story had been true. The cobbles were made of silver, or some similar metal, though littered over with a layer of dry pale dust that gleamed where a hoof or a wheel had scraped off the dirt. "This must be a rich town," thought Dido. "After all, I'm glad I came. Wonder which of them buildings is the palace." Away to her left rose a high wooded hill, on top of which she noticed a tall, slender tower, but that seemed too small for the palace. Dido craned about inquisitively, wishing that she could see farther. A thin mountain mist concealed the more distant buildings, and then, suddenly, as the sun climbed higher, the mist was drawn into the upper air and disappeared. Dido fairly gasped at the prospect, which then lay revealed. Now she could see that Bath nestled in the scooped-out summit of a low hill, in the middle of a high, flat plateau encircled by a ring of 13 volcanoes, Ambage and Araby, Ertini and Elami, Arik, Damask, Damiac, Pounce, Pampoil, Gares, Galais, Calabay, and Catalonde. All around the city their great symmetrical cones reared up like ninepins, some quite near at hand, some farther off, some snow-covered or laced over by glaciers, some reddish, some llama-colored, some blue with distance, some flashing in the sun, some rising out of dazzling ice fields, some shrouded by forests on their lower slopes. From half a dozen ascended gray, white, or black columns of smoke, showing that these great chimneys of the inner world still contained fires in their hearts and might erupt. One, Catalonde, had an enormous rock, big as a cathedral, balanced on its summit. "Wow," muttered Dido. "I wouldn't fancy being up here if they all sneezed together. Guess it wouldn't be quite so chilly in Bath Regis then." However, the larger of the smoking peaks appeared to be some 30 or 40 miles away. It was to be hoped that there was no great danger from them. Becoming too cold to remain on the balcony, Dido made her way down to the breakfast parlor. Here she found Noah Gusset, Mr. Windward, and Mr. Multiple partaking of gravelly barley bread and cups of hot chocolate that seemed to consist principally of brown sugar and boiling water. "How's Mr. Holy?" was Dido's first question. "He's still sleeping," the lieutenant told her. "Captain Hughes is waiting for the physician. The sleep is so heavy that it hardly seems natural. Meanwhile, I have instructions to escort you to the dressmaker, Miss Dido." Dido pulled a face at the prospect, but still she was longing to go out, and bolted down her unappetizing breakfast with dispatch. In 10 minutes they were out in the street, accompanied by Mr. Multiple. There were no shops in Pulteney Street, the wide thoroughfare which led to the hotel, but on the covered bridge over the rushing Severn they found many little booths. Dido was interested to see that these advertised their wares by means of flags, red for meat, white for milk, green for vegetables, fruit or flowers, yellow for bread. The stall-holders were in the process of unlocking their premises, using enormous heavy keys shaped like swans or lions or fishes. Many of the people walking about seemed to have wooden legs. Why, Dido wondered, had they been bitten by aurochs? Rich people who rode in sedan chairs wore elaborately piled and powdered hair. The market women had black mantos or shawls wrapped tightly round the upper part of their bodies, above long black skirts, and often a kind of blanket folded in 3 on their heads. The men wore ruanas, blue jackets and trousers, wooden clogs on their feet, and straw hats. As in Bewdley and Tenby, there were no children to be seen, and Dido was a target for many stares of astonishment and some hostility. Mr. Windward pulled his watch from his pocket and consulted it. Then he tapped it with some annoyance. "It stopped. It never did that before. Still, we must be in good time if the lady opens up shop at 9. It was 8:30 when we left the inn." Orange Grove, a small street of superior dwellings, lay to their left, not far beyond the bridge. "Bless my soul!" exclaimed Lieutenant Windward. "Half these houses are Roman villas." "Well, a lot of Romans did come and settle here. Mr. Holy told me so," Dido reminded him. "Look, here's a sign that says Madame Etarde. Modesty." Madame Etarde's establishment had been adapted from a Roman villa. It was built around a court where a fountain splashed, and pinched-looking orange trees grew in tubs. Dido could tell as soon as they stepped inside that Madame Etarde had been tipped off to expect them. "Is this the lucky young lady who is to see the Queen?" called a welcoming voice. "Step in here, miss, if you please." During the night, the recollection had returned to Dido of where she had previously heard the name Etarde. It had been mentioned by Mrs. Morgan and Mrs. Vavasour. This was not likely to recommend it, nor did the appearance of its owner. Lady Etarde was a dwarf, hardly more than 3 feet high. Her shoulders were crooked, giving her a lopsided walk. She had a pale, sharp-featured face and greenish eyes rather close set, which studied Dido appraisingly. Her hair, dressed high and lavishly ornamented with pearls, was a much more brilliant red than nature could have managed on its own. She was richly dressed in dark olive silk taffeta, pinstriped in yellow. She was also, Dido felt almost certain, the short woman who, wrapped in a black shawl, had limped along the quay and spoken to Silver Taffy at Bewdley. "What a fortunate coincidence!" purred Lady Etarde, beckoning a couple of assistants, one tall, one short. They wore black silk dresses, muslin mob caps, and black half-masks. "We have here, my dear, a dress originally ordered for a young lady who is planning to make her come out at court this spring, when only last month she unexpectedly disappeared. Young ladies do have a way of suddenly popping off in these parts, but I believe her gown will fit you to a T, miss. With just a tuck or two and a take-in. See now if that isn't just the article. Complete shade, gown, silver scarf, sandals, gloves, petticoats, feathers, everything needful for you to make your curtsy to the Queen." A very pretty silver-embroidered white mull dress was displayed by the silent assistants. That looks well enough, said Lieutenant Windward, who appeared somewhat weighted down by this unusual responsibility. But I reckon she'd best try it on. The fitting room is behind that curtain, said Lady Attarde, smiling. The assistants took a step toward Dido, but nothing was going to get Dido behind that curtain. Oh, no, she declared. I ain't a-going in there. I'll just slip the dress on over my shimmy, she added carefully, removing her pea-jacket. In front of a gentleman? Impossible, dear, said Lady Attarde, shocked by her assistants murmured. The idea. You just turn and face the other way, Mr. Windward, Dido told him. Don't you leave the shop, not nohow. Mr. Windward did feel the trop, but recognized the appeal in Dido's voice. Besides, he had very firm instructions from Captain Hughes. Accordingly, he sat himself down on a spindly gold love seat facing the window. Young ladies will take these nervous fancies, murmured Lady Attarde pityingly. But Dido, ignoring the scornful smiles of Lady Attarde and her workwoman, pulled the mull dress over her head, as she did so, remarking conversantly to Mr. Windward, There was a fellow called Bran who came up on the train yesterday. He was telling a real rum story about a man who kept seeing his double. A long cheval glass stood by Dido, sharply watching Lady Attarde. In this, while buttoning her dress, Dido observed the dressmaker turn white as the dress itself. One of the assistants dropped a box of pins, while the bigger one let out a little whimper. Bran, quiet, you nutnik. Quiet, you nuttikin, snapped Lady Attarde. Then, resuming her polished manner, she remarked to the lieutenant, This Bran, they call him, is quite a quiz indeed. He is the Queen's Jongleur, you know. So he may do as he chooses. He wanders about collecting tales and songs. It is said that sometimes even he works in the silver mines. Imagine it. She gave a light, contemptuous laugh. Ha! They say he can hear anything that's said anywhere, whispered one of the women. Pick up those pins, you fool, and hold your tongue, said Lady Attarde, and she made one or two slight alterations to the dress, pinning back a fold at the side, adjusting the shoulders, taking up the hem. Dido wonderingly studying the image in the glass, could hardly believe that the shimmering stranger was herself. Feathers? Suggested one of the masked women, offering a bunch of white silver plumes. But Dido's hair was so short that the feathers could not be attached to her head. I don't like 'em above half anyhow, she said, handing them back. They make me look like a circus pony. They are quite to wear at court, Madame Attarde informed her coldly. Can't help that, Dido replied as coldly. A little silver and crystal tiara with a spun glass spray was found instead, and Madame Attarde undertook to deliver the whole costume by an hour after noon. Lieutenant Windward then paid the staggering price, and he and Dido took their leave. Mr. Multiple was waiting for them outside. Croupice, said Dido. It ain't half costing the cap just to have me pass the time of day with the Queen. Wonder why he's so fixed on the notion. Lieutenant Windward, too, thought it queer, but he had been trained not to question his commanding officer's decisions, and so made no comment. Look, he said, I believe that must be the royal palace over there. See the guards? But what a very singular building. He peered at it through narrowed blue eyes and said incredulously, It appears to be revolving. Guess you're right, said Dido after a moment's study. Well, if that don't beat all, wouldn't you think her royalty would get a bit giddy inside there? Bath Palace was indeed an unusual dwelling. Large, circular, and 5 or 6 stories high, it rose beside the rushing Severn, part of which had been diverted in order to surround the palace with water. A narrow bridge led to the entrance, which was guarded by gray uniformed soldiers with pikes. They wore silver-visored helmets with gray plumes, which made them look, Dido thought, like ghosts. But the great oddity was certainly the palace itself. Is it made of silver, do you reckon, Mr. Windward? Some kind of metal, he confirmed. But it can hardly be silver, surely. It don't half dazzle, Dido said. It dazzled indeed. Scattered up and down its shining height, they saw the city of Bath reflected in a series of somewhat distorted images. The windows, there were not many, interrupted those reflections, like black pockmarks. There was an immense main door of bronze, Lieutenant Windward thought, and set into this a much smaller wicket, composed of two interlocking metal surfaces put at right angles to each other. These continually revolved, so that people could pass through if they were fairly nippy about it. And the whole building itself kept turning round very slowly, almost imperceptibly, unless you took your eyes away and looked again. Wonder who thought that up, said Dido, much impressed. Do you reckon that's the way we'll go in, Mr. Windward, through those spinning doors? I imagine so. There appears to be no other entrance. Well, I wouldn't want to live there, Dido declared. If you ask me, it looks like an outsized milk churn. Shall we go to inspect some of the other sights in the town? Suggested Lieutenant Windward. Captain Hughes has dispatched a note to the Vicar General asking what time it would be convenient for him to wait on Her Majesty. But he said we need not be back until noon. It must be quite early still. He pulled out his watch, tapped it impatiently, and said to Mr. Multiple, Do you have your timepiece on you? Mine stopped too, said Mr. Multiple, inspecting it. That's rum. Can I have forgotten to wind it? No matter. We shall be sure to hear a clock strike. Look, where you were in the dressmaker's, I bought this guidebook. Shall we visit the market or the assembly rooms or the museum? All of them, said Dido. Let's be off. Mr. Multiple had already studied the map of the town, and he was able to lead them directly to the main market. This, not far away, was a glassed-over series of arcades where dozens of stalls sold fruit, toys, salt barley, tobacco, vegetables, gaily decorated leather pouches, harnesses, and saddles, meat, fifes and guitars, fur caps with decorated ear flaps, straw hats, woven woolen materials, and small animals made from clay and straw. I'll buy some of those for my sister's children, said Mr. Windward, halting by a display of the latter. Which do you think they'd like, Miss Dido? Dido, inspecting the animals, began to be conscious of the stallholder's angry stare. Ha! Very fine for the gringo child to choose herself a toy, the woman said harshly. Play while you may, foreign brat. Vipures. My daughter was taken by the aurochs, and so was my sister's child. Think yourself lucky you don't stay here long, milk-face. A warning glance from Lieutenant Windward prevented Dido from making any retort. He quickly bought a couple of clay llamas and hurried his companions away. Looking back, Dido saw the woman spit after them furiously, then fling her shawl overhead and sit rocking herself to and fro. Poor thing, Dido muttered. You can't blame her for being a bit ugly. It's a rum do about them aurochs, though, ain't it, Mr. Windward? We keep hearing about 'em. It's a wonder we ain't seen more of 'em, seeing they sweep so many young'uns. She glanced up apprehensively, but nothing was to be seen overhead save a couple of condors wheeling about. They inspected the museum, an ancient Roman building not far from the palace. Over its door was a woman's head carved in stone, with a very beautiful face and snakes for hair. The lieutenant said she was a Gorgon. What's that, Mr. Windward? A kind of witch. She could turn people to stone. Wonder she gets any sleep at night with them all hissing round the pillow, Dido said. The museum contained the 13 treasures of Britain, which the settlers of New Cumbria had brought with them at the time of the exodus from the land. The basket, sword, drinking horn, chariot, halter, knife, cauldron, whetstone, garment, pan, platter, chessboard, and mantle. But it was plain that the museum staff were not too active in caring for their treasures. The sword was missing from its scabbard, the basket was worm-eaten, the garment and mantle were alive with moths, and the other exhibits were in equally poor condition. What a lot of fusty old stuff, said Dido, when Mr. Multiple drew her attention to an arrow on the wall and a sign that said, To the zoological garden containing the 4 ancient creatures, Usul, Kilwiri, etc. Admission 1 bezant. She said, Don't let's see any more old things. Let's go somewhere else. They were much more impressed by the Roman baths. These were still in regular use, and indeed, both Lieutenant Windward and Mr. Multiple declared their intention of returning for a dip later in the day, since the Hotel Sydney's plumbing left almost everything to be desired. The visitors saw a series of immense chambers, five baths of varying heat, 2 swimming pools of warm, pale green water with wreaths of steam rising, sweat rooms, cool rooms, and robbing rooms, all roofed with pale vaulted stone. The keeper of the baths informed them that the water was heated by the nearest volcano, Mount Damiac. So indeed was the whole town, by means of a series of underground ducts. "Damiac don't do a very good job, then," grumbled Dido. "Back there in the sweat room was the first time I'd been warm today." Mount Damiac is thought to be cooling down," explained the keeper. "In 100 years, who knows? The city of Bath may be too cold for its inhabitants to remain here. Some of the people think that the Queen, heaven smile on her royal mercy, uses too much of Damiac's heat for her own personal convenience." "Why, what does she use it for?" asked Mr. Multiple, but the keeper, evidently feeling that he had been indiscreet, would say no more. The travelers went on to inspect the pump room, where they drank a glass of very nasty mineral water, which Dido said tasted like unwashed duck's feet, and Mr. Multiple kindly bought her a large bath bun. Then, since they could not discover the correct time, there appeared to be no clocks in the city of Bath. They returned across the Rialto Bridge, and so back along the Pulteney Road to the hotel, observing for the first time the handsome public gardens in the oval circus behind the Sydney, which contained 2 sham castles, 2 Chinese cast-iron bridges, some thatched umbrellas in case it was ever warm enough to sit out of doors, and a rotunda, besides a great many cactus plants. At the hotel, Captain Hughes was walking up and down impatiently by the big hourglass in the vestibule. Strangely enough, all members of the party who possessed timepieces had discovered that these had simultaneously come to a stop at the moment when they were brought into the city of Bath. Captain Hughes, rather perplexed, had attributed the phenomenon to the altitude. "Matters are an excellent train," he told them. "I have a most affable message from Queen Ginevra, instructing me to wait on her at 2. "What about the togs?" Dido said. "My clobber, I mean." "Miss Twice, please," said the captain. "Do not refer to your wearing apparel in that fashion. The garments have been sent home, and the chambermaid will assist you in robing yourself. A nuncheon has been sent to your chamber. You had best repair there directly and set about making yourself presentable. Do not omit to wash your face." "What did the doc say about Mr. Holystone?" The captain's brow clouded. "He is not certain. He believes it is possible that the man is merely suffering from altitude sickness, and hopes that a day or 2 should show some improvement in his condition. I must say," Captain Hughes said aggrievedly, "it is deuced inconvenient having him laid up just now. Mr. Multiple, pray mount guard over Miss Dido's door while she is being apparelled. We want no untoward incidents." Dido went glumly to her room, where a surly black-haired girl was waiting to help. She had also brought up a nuncheon tray on which was a beefsteak as large as a paving stone, enough pepper and potato stew to feed a choir, and a dozen peaches. "Blimey! I can't eat all that," said Dido, who was full of Bath bun. "I'd get the hiccups while I was making my curtsy to a royalty. I'll eat the peaches. Wouldn't you like the rest?" Waiting for no second invitation, the chambermaid swallowed the soup in 3 gulps and the steak in 6 enormous bites. Thawing then, somewhat in her manner, she helped Dido don petticoat, dress, slippers, and stockings. "I don't look half a sight," Dido said, viewing herself uncertainly in the mildewed glass as the chambermaid brushed her hair. "You go to see Su Merced, Queen Hunefra?" inquired the girl, pronouncing it Cunefra. Yes, worse luck. It wouldn't be so bad if I didn't have to curtsy. Dido attempted a bob, but since she was wholly unaccustomed to long skirts, the attempt was a complete failure. She fell over sideways, and her tiara rolled under the bed. Curiously enough, the chambermaid did not find this in the least amusing. She was gazing at Dido in something like horror. She made the sign that Silver Taffy had on the thrush, a figure eight like a pair of spectacles in the air, done with finger and thumbs. Go see the queen, said the girl hoarsely. She'll look at you through her glasses. You get caught by Aurochs soon after, in 5 days. How do you know? Dido tried to sound calm about it, but she had a nasty crawling sensation down her backbone. Everyone know. Namine. Desentiente. Everyone say. Everyone say. Despite her fear, Dido could not help feeling impatient too. The girl's excited whisper and staring eyes made what she said seem less, not more believable. Who says? Many, many people. Have you ever seen an auroch? Gemini, no me. For the first time the chambermaid looked cheerful. When I am 5, my mater and pater send me to work in silver mines. No aurochs there. I stay work underground till I am 15. Work in silver mine is not nice. She exhibited her hands and arms, blackened and scarred from heavy work. But it's better than aurochs. Young'uns of 5 work in the mines? The girl nodded. Many, many, safe there. If no get squashed by truck. How many get squashed by truck? The girl shrugged. Some, sum, cinque, periculum, danger anywhere. Here the conversation was interrupted by a melancholy mew. It seemed to come from under the bed. That's funny, said Dido. Everywhere I go, I keep hearing cats. Thought I heard one all night. She knelt down to retrieve her fallen tiara and found herself looking into a pair of desperate golden eyes. Well, I'll be bothered. It's another like Dora. Where the blue blazes do they all come from? Well, step along out, then. No sense lurking in under there, said Dido, and she put down the plate with the grisly end of the beefsteak. In 4 famished bites, the cat had demolished the unappetizing fragment, then eagerly licked out the peppery stew bowl. Ay, 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 whispered the chambermaid, watching this with startled eyes. Old Grandmother Sewell herself would be watching over you, Gringo Puella. Who's Grandmother Sewell? The girl, without answering, bent over the cat, which was still engaged in pushing the soup bowl over the cactus matting, and deftly twitched out a long silvery whisker from each cheek. What'd you do that to the poor thing for? But the chambermaid, knotting and twisting the whiskers together, plaited them into a loop and slipped it over Dido's index finger. There, you keep on under glove. Not know how to take off. Maybe you safe, maybe not. Cum, grano salis. Then, making the figure 8 sign again, she snatched up the dishes and ran from the room. Humph! What'll we do with you, puss, eh? Poor thing, you're half starved, ribs like railings. Well, what do you know? You've got a collar too, and another page from that pesky dictionary. New Cumbria, muttered Dido, detaching the little packet. Ain't half full of educated cats. This cat's page, after informing Dido that a cough was a convulsion of the lungs, delicated by some serosity, had another message in dark brown ink. For mercy's sake, help me. Only air for 3 days. Ellen. Dido studied this appeal with compressed lips and knitted brow. Then, as a double thump sounded on her door, tucked it into her white elbow-length gloves. Miss Twite, are you ready? Came Multiple's voice. The captain is calling for you. I'm a-comin', said Dido hastily. Tell his whiskers to keep calm. After hitching up her draperies of silver-spangled mull, she opened the door. Reckon you'll have to help me downstairs, though, Mr. Mully, or I'm liable to go tail over tip. Very proper, approved Captain Hughes at the foot of the stairs, observing Dido's cautious descent, assisted by the midshipman. Now you look just as you ought. Mind those skirts. I have a carriage waiting. He wrapped a shawl of white vicuna wool round Dido and put her in the carriage, where Mr. Windward was already seated, looking stiff and uncomfortable. Both the captain and his first lieutenant were rigged up very fine in full dress uniforms, with knee breeches, gold-laced jackets, epaulets, cocked hats, feathers and swords, which clanked a great deal and tended to trip the wearers. "Glad I ain't coming," murmured Mr. Multiple with a grin, passing Dido her fan. "Keep an eye on Mr. Holy, and feed the cat in my room," she called just before the footman slammed the door. And that is the end of Chapter 5.